Page 69, Freedom Wagon, Madison, Indiana, 1840s. So now they're back in time. In the soft glow of the lantern light, the man set to work on the horses. He stroked their long necks and spoke to them softly. Then he began putting something on their hooves. I couldn't quite make out what he was doing. Before I could ask, the professor spoke. The man you're watching is putting pieces of carpet on the horses' hooves so they can move quietly through the night. But the wagon looks like it's broken, Tamika added. Before the professor could answer, the man carried the lantern closer to the wagon. He put the light down and started to work. He quickly repaired the wagon. What looked to be a big job was really simple and easy to fix. Then he hitched up the horses and placed the reins carefully on the seat of the wagon. What he did next surprised us. The man turned his lantern down as low as it could go. Then he opened the barn door wide. After looking around carefully, he put his hands to his mouth and made a hooting sound like an owl. The night was quiet and still. He waited and listened carefully, keeping watch for danger all the time. The man raised and lowered the lantern 2 times, then turned the light off completely. Professor Tuesday asked his nephew to move the camera back a bit. Mr. Adams moved the joystick back carefully and turned the camera toward a nearby woodlot. In the pale moonlight, we could see several shadows edging carefully toward the barn. Hushed whispers were exchanged, and people started climbing up into the wagon. When all the passengers were aboard, the wagon headed out of the stable and followed a path through the farmland. The horses' hooves made very little noise. The passengers on the wagon peered silently over its sides, watching for signs of trouble along the road. Mr. Adams turned to Professor Tuesday and signed a question. "No, don't follow the wagon," answered the professor. "Let's keep the camera right where it is. We can watch to see if there are any slave catchers watching them." After the wagon was out of sight, we heard something moving. Whatever it was close to the critter cam. We all jumped when we heard a dog barking. Mr. Adams pushed on the joystick and started chasing the dog with the critter cam. It was very funny to watch. "I think it's time we brought the critter cam back for today," said Professor Tuesday. Mr. Adams turned the critter cam around and drove it right back through the Tuesday teleporter. It returned to the professor's office in minutes. Professor Tuesday closed his time machine, and the green cloud disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "I thought we were going to visit George D. Baptiste," Tamika said in a pouty voice. "The man who was driving the wagon was George D. Baptiste," answered the professor. "Now we are going to learn more about him in the city of Madison, Indiana." "Great," I said. "How are we going to do that?" Professor Tuesday turned and looked at Tamika and me. "You two are going to learn about George D. Baptiste using some old and new technology." "Wow," Tamika said excitedly. "When can we start?" "You can start any time you want," answered the professor. "Huh?" Tamika asked. "What do you mean we can start any time we want? Aren't you going to take us back in time to learn about Mr. D. Baptiste?" "No," replied the professor. "You're going to do some reading, and you're going to write a report on him. Plus, I want you to do some research. Your assignment is to tell me about Mr. D. Baptiste's wagon and the town of Madison, Indiana." "What?" Tamika cried. "That's too much like school. I thought you were going to help us learn about the Underground Railroad." The professor looked at Tamika and me over the top of his glasses. "I'm helping you learn. Do you remember what Mr. Douglas said about the importance of reading and learning about history?" Tamika nodded her head sadly. She didn't like homework, especially extra homework. "We remember," I said. "We can work on the report together. Plus, I bet that Miss Pepper will give us extra credit." "I would imagine that she will," said the professor. "In fact, I will call her and suggest that she give you extra credit for your work. I have some books for you to read. Plus, if you go to the public library, you'll probably be able to find a great deal of information about George D. Baptiste and the history of Madison, Indiana." Mr. Adams tugged on the bottom of Professor Tuesday's jacket. "Oh, I see that my nephew has gathered up some books for you on the Underground Railroad. Perhaps you'll find some information. You can start with these." "Thank you, Professor," I said as I took the books from him. "Yeah, thanks," Tamika added. Her voice didn't sound too happy, though. Before we left the professor's office, he made one more point. "If you decide to do an internet search about George D. Baptiste, make sure you have an adult with you." "We will," Tamika said as she looked down at her shoes. I could tell she didn't like the idea of extra work. "Come on, Tamika, this will be fun." Though it was dark back in Madison, Indiana, it was still daytime in the professor's office. There was still plenty of daylight when we left the professor's office and started walking to Tamika's house a few blocks away. I could tell she was upset because reading wasn't her thing. Even Miss Pepper has a hard time getting her to read. When Professor Tuesday gave us some books and asked us to do a special report, she didn't like it one bit. I wanted to learn more about the Underground Railroad, but I didn't want to do all the reading and work on the report by myself. When we got to Tamika's house, I gave her one book, and I took the rest. I was afraid I'd gotten myself into another pickle. I might have to do this report all by myself.